Good afternoon, everyone. Today is October 25th, the Wednesday note, and we have a very special guest who's going to be presenting on four paths to divorce. Please welcome Michael Cohen to our special session, who is our special guest and an expert in the area that he's going to be talking about. Welcome, Michael. Welcome to this live session for Sanjeevni. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very good, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Michael, would you please introduce yourself and the work that you do to our audiences and how this topic is such an important one for the well being of everyone?
Absolutely. So I am a divorce mediator. A lot of people don't know what that is, and we'll talk about that today. There's four different ways to go through a divorce. Many people feel they have to call a lawyer, but when you call a lawyer, it often becomes very contentious and very stressful for the family. Another option is mediation, and we'll talk about why it's such a healthier process if you have to go through a divorce for yourself, your spouse, and your children if you have them.
And Michael, mediation is a term that most often people are not very familiar with. Would you also please explain what it is when we call it mediation?
Absolutely. When you have lawyers, like each lawyer will represent a party. So there's a lawyer for the husband, a lawyer for the wife. When you have a mediator, the mediator doesn't represent either the husband or the wife. The mediator actually represents the process. So the mediator is there to help the couple to make their own decisions and make sure they're thorough and creative and making good decisions for their family. And it's up to the couple to make all the decisions, which is a really nice benefit of mediation. In other words, you're not being told what you have to decide by a lawyer or a judge. You get to sit there in a neutral, facilitated discussion with a mediator to understand and make the best decisions for your family with your spouse.
Thank you so much, Michael. And we do understand you have a set of slides that you'll be presenting. We did get some questions from our audiences offline, and I'll go through it once the presentation is completed. And anyone watching in any of the areas, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and they will be addressed by Michael.
All right. Thank you very much. So I've got this coined the healthiest divorce because if you're in a situation of going through a divorce, there's four ways to go through a divorce. And depending on your circumstances, one of those four ways might be the healthiest way for you. And I'm going to describe all of them for you. Real quickly, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but this is me. On the left, this is myself and my girlfriend and my puppy, Franny. In the middle is my son, Jordan, and on the far right is my son, Daniel. In the bottom right, you'll see an outline of a girl, and that's my daughter. I went through a litigated divorce, and it was very contentious for the family and my kids, and my daughter was alienated from me as a result of the divorce, and she no longer talks to me. This is why I'm doing this, because I've seen how bad divorces can be for children. So I was very fortunate to be able to pivot my career and become a divorce mediator, where my primary focus is to help families, to help their children to get through a divorce in a healthier manner. What I want to do is educate everybody on the four different ways that you can divorce. Like I said earlier, a lot of times people think the first step is to call a lawyer. I'm here to say that that's probably not the best first step that you can take. It often leads to a very contentious process. And once you go down that path and hire a lawyer, your spouse needs a lawyer, and then it's very hard to back out of that path. And that's the least healthy process you could go to divorce. So what I want you to know is there's four different ways you could do it. And for each person and each family and their unique situation, one of these is the best option for you. So if you start on the top left, self-divorce, moving to mediation, moving to the right column, collaborative law, and then the last item is lawyering up or litigating. that starts with the least contentious, least costly, least stressful process, and it gets more expensive, more timely, more stressful as you progress through that continuum. So self-divorce, you could divorce yourself. Now, I don't recommend this for a lot of people, but if you're recently married without children and your finances aren't that complicated, you can do it yourself. The county courthouses have the forms. You can go online and get the forms. If you go into the courthouse, there's generally people who could help you. It's not that complicated if your situation isn't that hard. That would require you and your spouse to be able to sit down together and do it. But that path is doable. I wouldn't recommend it if you have children, because there are so many decisions you have to make about children that it's hard to figure that out on your own. And I also wouldn't recommend it if your finances are very complicated. But like I said, if you're recently married, no children, not a complicated financial situation, this might be an option you think about. The next option up is mediation. And that's what I do. And that's what I think is the healthiest path for a couple that has to go through a divorce. Mediation, like I said, is a process where there's a single neutral facilitator who helps the couples make their own decisions about their parenting decisions and their financial divisions. This process is one where the couple is encouraged to work together and make decisions for themselves that are best for their family. In contrast, when you go in front of a judge and you litigate your divorce, oftentimes those decisions are made by a judge. And that judge doesn't have a lot of time to review your family situation, the dynamics, the needs of your children. And they all often just to make a decision that's based on precedent or somewhere in the middle. So both spouses usually walk out of that not happy with that decision. When you mediate, you get to be as creative as you want to be to create your own solutions for your kids and for your finances. Mediation is also the least expensive of all the other options. Most mediators don't charge a retainer. So a retainer is something that a lawyer will ask for upfront, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 just to start working with them. With a mediator, there's no retainer upfront. The hourly charge is significantly lower. And just personally for myself, I cap all of my expenses at $5,000. I'll tell you that I've never charged anyone $5,000 because we often complete it in far less time than is required for that billing. So for a few $1,000s, you could get through a mediation session from start to finish for your divorce, as opposed to when you litigate and you go into the courtroom. I've heard couples spend $20,000 each, $50,000 each, $100,000 each. 2 weeks ago, I ran into a woman who spent $300,000 on their divorce. Now, that's an extreme, but like on average, people could spend $50,000 each, which is $100,000 coming out of the family accounts. That's essentially a college education for your children. So instead of spending that much money and getting a worse outcome, my recommendation is to consider mediation because it's much less costly and it's a much healthier outcome for you. The other big difference is that mediation is relatively quick. You could start and finish a mediated divorce in 3 to 4 months maximum time. Whereas in Illinois, where I work, and you litigate, it takes a year or two to complete your divorce. All right, so then moving on, if you can't mediate, there are 2 other options. And I'll go through this a little bit more later as well. But in order to mediate, you have to be able to sit in a room with your spouse or on a Zoom call. You have to be able to talk to each other. You have to be able to listen to each other, which is very important. And you have to be transparent with your finances and your needs. And lastly, you have to be willing to compromise. So some couples can't do all those things. And if they can't, then mediation isn't an option for them. So then the next step up would be collaborative law. Collaborative law is a case where you each have a lawyer, but it's not in the courtroom. They meet with you privately, and the lawyers still try to help you have an amicable divorce and allow you to make all of your own decisions yourself. They guide you, and it's done in private. The difference between mediation and collaborative law is it's more expensive, but it's not a bad process. If you can't mediate, I would highly recommend you look into the collaborative process. And when you do that, you need to find a lawyer that practices the collaborative process. Many lawyers will say they do it, but they also litigate. And the litigating lawyers are not as good at the collaborative process as the lawyers that do that exclusively. So it's very important to select the right lawyer. Lastly, if that's not an option, there's some cases where spouses, unfortunately, just want to hurt each other and just want to make the divorce painful, and they don't want to compromise, and they want to take everything they can. And unfortunately, in some cases, you have to get a lawyer and you have to litigate. That's the most unhealthy process. It's the worst process for the children because it forces the parents not to talk to each other. It inflicts a lot of stress into the family, and it takes a long time. So the kids go through this stressful process for 1 to 2 years, and it really affects them. There's a saying that says, children are not affected by divorce, they're affected by how you divorce. And that's why I strongly suggest people consider mediation. Now, I talked about a lot of these, so I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but just as a reminder, mediation is by far the cheapest process. It's the quickest process. You make all of your own decisions. It is the best path for helping you become good co-parents for your children. When you divorce, a lot of people think of their spouse as their soon-to-be ex. That's not a good process. The sooner you could start thinking about your spouse as your co-parent, the better your kids will be. Because guess what? You're going to be their parents for life, and you have to work together. And when you go through a mediation process, the mediator is trained to help coach you to implement good parenting practices that are healthy for your children. This isn't done in the courtroom. So that's another value that comes out of mediation. And then lastly, you save significant lawyer fees. Again, as a reminder on the litigation option, it's very adversarial. It's extremely expensive. There's a lot of stress. You generally do not make many of your own decisions. They're imposed upon you, and it has a terrible effect on your children. So I strongly recommend, if you don't have to litigate, don't litigate. Little overview of mediation and some of the key principles. Everything is done confidentially. So if for whatever reason you go to court on any topics, anything said in the mediation can't be brought into that court. So it's very open and transparent, and we could have back and forth to understand and try to create the best solutions. The mediator is neutral. The mediator doesn't represent the husband or the spouse, just represents the process. It's up to the parent, the spouses, to make their decisions. In mediation, there's full transparency. There's an expectation that the husband and the wife are both sharing all their finances and all of their needs. It's very flexible. When I went through my divorce, I can't tell you how many hours I wasted in the courtroom. You have to be there at a certain time and wait for your case to be heard. And I wasted so much time in the courtroom. It was just ridiculous. When you mediate, at least with me, and I know with many other mediators, we work around your schedule. So if you need to work on having a session in the evening when the kids are asleep, we could do that. If the weekends are better, we can do that. We work around your schedule to minimize your loss of time at work or at home. With mediation, I mentioned that the mediator doesn't represent either party, but you still have an attorney review, and you also still have a judge review. So at the end of the process, there's a summary document that's prepared that goes to a lawyer, and the lawyer will review it to make sure it's fair and not unconscionable, and that the judge will approve it. So you do get a lawyer's eyes on it to make sure that it's reasonable. And then it does still have to go to the judge, who will also review it and have to give his or her approval. So you still get a lawyer review and a judge review. You're also able to bring a lawyer into a mediation session or consult with them on the side. Mediation is voluntary. You could stop at any time. And it's non-binding. Nothing is binding until you get your agreement presented in front of a judge. So we often tweak it and make changes throughout the process as you sleep on it and decide what's most important for yourselves. I mentioned that in order to mediate, you have to be able to work together and communicate and listen, transparent, be fair and reasonable with each other. And I apologize that some of these slides are compressing, but you have to have a desire to minimize stress and negative impact to your family, and also have a willingness to compromise with each other. No need to review this, but I just wanted to share, when you go through a mediated divorce, you cover all of the same topics that are covered in a litigated divorce. Just for reference, I've got 100 different topics in my process. 70 of them are on the children. So the children is a very big process because I want both spouses to walk away in the best ability to help their kids through the divorce. So in summary, there are couples that need to hire an attorney just because they cannot communicate effectively or compromise together. But if you could put your children's needs first and you could agree to be reasonable and transparent and fair, you should consider mediation. It's the cheapest, quickest, healthiest outcome for the family. So I would strongly recommend you consider it. And I will open it up to questions. And while I'm doing that, I'll leave my contact information up here just because this is a passion project for me. And if anybody doesn't have their question answered during this process, you could feel free to reach out to me. I do not charge for anything on the phone. I'm happy to talk to you as often as needed and help you understand what your options are. It's important for me to help make sure you're educated.
Thank you so much, Michael. This was extremely helpful information. And to all Sanjeevani clients or anyone who is watching this particular session, this information is a tool for you to make informed decision about what may be going on with you, or if there is an abusive situation, and if you are thinking of not being in that relationship, and what are the options available for you. So mediation, as Michael mentioned, is one of the most cost-effective solution, but of course it comes with its terms and conditions. So Michael, we did get some offline questions. Let me just go through with it. Does mediation cover information about alimony or child support?
It does. And funny you should say that. I just finished a session with a couple yesterday where we decided on alimony and child support. So it does. I also have a CPA, so I understand that area. And we do cover all of the financial areas as well as the parenting. In fact, there's not a decision that isn't included in mediation.
Whenever a couple decides to part, most often it happens that emotions run very, very high. And during that process, it's very important that if they are choosing mediation, they have to be unbiased. How does a mediator help in this?
Yeah, this is a really good question. If you could imagine when you have a conflict with somebody, whether it's at work or a friend or a family member, and it's the two of you in a room, stress is very high, the conflict is very fresh, and it's really hard to talk in a healthy manner. Now imagine a third person walks into the room, and it's somebody that you don't know or you get to know, but it's somebody who's impartial. Think of a work environment. Your boss walks in, a coworker walks in, and you can imagine that the tension lowers because you're talking through that person. So that's one way. Just the dynamic works that way. But also, a mediator is trained to focus the couple on looking forward. When you're in therapy, you do a lot of looking back. When you're in mediation, you're just looking forward. And what I do is I try to put a North Star out there of doing the right thing for the kids and trying to move forward and make the right decisions. And there's techniques that we have to focus parents and spouses to work together. Surprising to me, like most of my sessions are very, I don't want to say jovial, but we joke around and I see spouses asking each other for their input. And I've told many of my clients, I said, you guys can fire me at any time because you guys work together and communicate so well. So call me anytime and fire me. I'd love to see you stay together. So you'd be surprised at how well it helps couples to communicate effectively.
Thank you, Michael. We have one more question from one of the Sanjeevani clients. They are, according to that particular client, going to a lawyer would be maybe a good deal because that they can get more benefit in terms of finances, and because the client feels that the other spouse may be hiding some information, or all of the assets are not completely declared. Would the mediator take care of such issues?
Well, if either spouse feels the other spouse is hiding assets, that will not work in mediation. What I would recommend you do, and in that case, you probably do need to work with an attorney to subpoena records. You could also hire what's called a forensic accountant who has ways to identify all of the accounts in each other's names, and that will come into the process as well. But as far as getting a better financial settlement with a lawyer, I would tend to disagree with that. As I mentioned, people could spend $100,000 on a litigated divorce, depending on what your net worth is. Sometimes that far outweighs the difference that a lawyer may be able to get for you. But remember, too, when a lawyer gets you something, it's taking away from your spouse and it's creating a division in the family, which affects the kids. I had a good friend who had, I'm going to just say for round numbers, he had $1 million of net worth, and he was divorcing his wife. And he said, I don't want to go through litigation. I'm going to give you 600,000 and I only want 400,000. And she said, that's fine. And in his mind, it was great because they didn't have to go through a 1 or 2 year process. They didn't have to pay lawyers hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he figures he came out better than if he had litigated.
Thank you, Michael. The concluding question we got offline is, if a couple goes to a mediator, do they need to disclose all of their finances, all of the issues, or how does it work? Like, is it like a session to share information from both sides separately, or is it done together?
Well, every mediator will do it differently, but like when I do a mediation session, I will meet with each parent. I'm sorry for saying parent, each spouse individually first, because I like to understand what their priorities are. So when we compromise, we could try to focus on what's most important to each spouse. I generally start with the parenting because I think that's the most important, and that's the easiest topics because I can look at both parents and say, you both want what's right for your children, correct? However, there are some processes that take more time than that. The marital home takes an extremely long time, and the finances takes a lot of time to prepare for. So before we start the parenting, I will get people started thinking about the marital home, and I'll also help them start to complete what's called an Illinois financial affidavit. That's a form that asks each spouse to complete their assets, their debts, their income, their cost of living. And when they complete that, that forms the foundation for the financial discussions. Before we meet to go through it, I'll review both of them. I'll have a lot of follow-up questions. I'll ask for support. And through that process, we'll all get comfortable that the numbers are fair and reasonable. And then we'll start the financial discussion.
Got it. Thank you, Michael. I think all of the information that you shared is extremely helpful. And to all our clients who may be watching or who will be watching this later, a phone call to Michael is free. So if there are any other questions pertaining to your case, as Michael said, he's available to respond by phone. The phone number is listed here, and we will also post it on our website so that in case there are questions, you can always reach out to him for guidance or, of course, for any other information that you need.
Yeah, can I add that?
Michael, is there any other concluding note that you would like to share before we conclude the session for today?
Yeah, actually, two things that thank you. if even if you have to litigate or there are other resources you need in this environment, reach out to me. I've got a very strong network of really good professionals that I could put you in touch with regard to finances, therapy, lawyers, coaches, etc. So if you need any resources, feel free to reach out to me. And then lastly, divorce is a really terrible process. So what I find most people when they make mistakes, it's because they're not educated. When you're educated, you can make the best decisions for yourself. So please reach out. The education is the most important thing. Just understand the processes, and then you'll make the best decisions for your family.
Right. And just to let the education is education about the process, education about the divorce. Michael, we got one more question right now. I know you mentioned you are based out of Illinois and you'll work according to the Illinois law. But say, for example, if we have clients in other parts of the country, East Coast or the southern states, would you have information to help them with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, right now I'm working with a client from New Jersey. And yeah, I work in all 50 states.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Once again, everyone watching this, you can please note down the email address, the phone number. We will also post it on our website and all the other distributions. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And Michael, many thanks for sharing this information and your time today. Much appreciated from everyone at Sanjeevni.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.